first set of prints we're going to be doing are your most basic, but they're also your bread and butter. One color prints, both a black ink on a white shirt and a white ink on a black shirt. Now these are very similar in size and consistency, however they're going to be very different to actually screen print. That's mainly due to the type of ink you're going to be using. Black ink is much thinner, white ink is much thicker. Now ink consistency is really measured by how much pigment is in the ink, and the pigment in the ink determines how opaque it is. So obviously different colors, depending on what colors they're meant to be printed on, are going to have different amounts of pigment, which are going to make them either thinner or thicker. Black ink covers pretty much everything very, very well. It's black. Obviously it doesn't need as much pigment as white ink would need, which typically is printed on a black garment, so you need to have a lot more opacity to block the background out in front of behind the white print. So a white ink has much more pigment in it, it's much thicker, and going to be very different to print. The same thing you see as the different colors in the catalog of inks that you're going to be using. So the yellows are always going to be a bit more thicker than, like, let's say the reds or the blues. It just depends on the color and the type of ink as well. Most kits come with your standard type of ink, which are your multi-purpose ink, and they're medium opacity, so they can be used on darks, but they're best used on darks with a white background or a white flash plate. Then you have your opaque inks, which are very opaque and could be sometimes printed directly on dark garments without using the white underbase. Then you have your transparent inks, which are more of your four-color simulated process inks, which typically are printed on light garments and mixed together to create other colors. So this is going to be an opaque ink, this is going to be your standard multi-purpose ink. Let's get going. The first thing you need to do is actually set your print up to your palette. We'll lower the screen. Now this screen has already been printed through. There's a couple different ways to set prints up. You can set prints up to your film, you can align it on the palette with a shirt, you can align it by eye, you can get a T-square out and align it that way. But your goal is obviously to be centered on the palette, so when you put your shirt on it's centered, and to be the right distance. Now typically on a front print, which this is going to be directly on the front of a shirt, you're going to need to be 3 to 4 fingers down. So that's typically going to correspond to 3 to 4 inches depending how big your fingers are. The other thing is you want your print centered. Now this is when it comes so important to set your artwork up and do your screen preparation the correct way. Now this particular print has center crop lines. If you want to zoom in here, you can actually see the crop lines right here and right here. Now even though these crop lines are taped off on the back of the screen, we can still see them. Now since we've actually centered the palette out, all we need to do to center this print up are align the two crop lines to the center of the palette, and boom, it's centered. That means it's going to be parallel and horizontal to your shirt and to your palette, and we don't even have to second guess ourselves getting this T-square out. Now, if we did not do this, we would have to either kind of measure by hand, you know, in the center of the screen here. Let's see how center is this print. Sometimes we can kind of see the design artwork, or you can get a T-square out, put it underneath the screen like so. If you have a parallel or horizontal line that you can match up with, you can do it this way, but much, much easier to just put those center crop marks in your artwork, making sure your artwork is centered on the palette on your computer screen, and then do the centering on the screen in your darkroom while the exposure process takes place. And now on the press, all we have to do is center it up to the center line. So let's center this guy up. This press doesn't have micro-registration adjustments, so we have to do everything by hand. Once we're centered up, we're just going to hold it down so it doesn't move while we're tightening it up. Then we're going to tighten up the screen clamp. Screen clamps, you don't want to press down too tight. Once they're tight, you just want to go maybe another quarter of a turn or half a turn to snug it in there. You do want to make sure this is tight before you go to print. Bring it down to the print position. The next thing you want to check for is off contact. We set the press up already, but you always want to check on your print for proper off contact. Now this off contact is pretty good in the back, it's a little low in the front, so to make a quick adjustment to that, we're going to quickly tape an off contact tab, which is a simple washer, quarter or dime, nickel, whatever, to the back of the screen. Now remember, during the setup process, the optimal position for a screen is so when it comes down, the top of your frame hits the very top of your neck cutout right here. which this screen is set up just about perfectly. So once we're centered up, we have very good off contact now. Let's determine the print placement on the shirt. First, let's load the shirt onto the palette. A lot of different people have different ways to load shirts. The goal is to get the shirt all the way on and then to center it back to the center line of the palette. Now, if you come in here and don't open the shirt up enough, it's a lot harder to actually get on the palette. And then if you don't push it all the way on the palette and kind of center it up like this, sometimes the top of the shirt might be not centered to the bottom of the shirt. Most shirts have a faint center line down the center, but you can't always trust those. So the best way to do it is actually to judge the center line by holding the two sleeves, the corners of the sleeve and the shoulder, and pulling it back. So the way I load shirts is I'm going to snap it to open it up as big as you can, and then put it on over the palette as much as it will fit on the platen. Sometimes you have to pull it back and push it back all the way on. Then once it's all the way on here, I'm going to lift up so the sticky platen does not hold or pull against the shirt, and then pull back, centering the shirt out. Sometimes you might have to do it again, but that centers the shirt out for proper print placement. Now let's kind of see where our neckline needs to be. Because once we've determined the neckline, all we have to do is actually put a little mark here with a magic marker or something like that. So to determine placement, what we can do is we can put our fingers down here and bring the screen down. We can use the edge of our finger to kind of pull up and touch the top of the image area. So once we see our finger touching the top of the image area, we will then come back and take a look at things. Now this is the top of my print. That's only about 2 fingers down. It's a little low. So we have a couple different options here. First option is we can pull the shirt back to where it comes up and touches the very top of the neck platen right here. Now let's come take a look at it. This is a little more than 4 fingers, so we'll actually bring it down a little bit, and our actual shirt placement will be right about there. Now, some people would rather have the shirt more contoured to the neckline. So the second option would be to actually take the platen, unscrew it, and move it up just a little bit. If we do this, we want to make sure to push against one side, particularly use the right side of the platen to make sure that it doesn't move back and forth, left and right, and it keeps perpendicular to the press. Then you want to pull the print down again. You want to make sure that your off contact tab is still touching the platen. So right now we'll move the shirt down just a little bit. And we got about a perfect 3-finger print placement right here. So we'll make our shirt mark. This is a medium shirt, so when you're making your shirt marks, you want to use your standard size of the shirt or your most popular shirt for the run. So if for this particular one, let's say we're doing 12 mediums and 12 larges, we can pretty much put the medium and large print placement in the same spot. Now if we're going to be using 12 mediums, 12 smalls, 12 larges, and we're doing some youth, we might have to adjust the platen up and down, which can be easily done once again by using the finger on the back of the screen method. Our shirt's aligned, but before we actually ruin a shirt with a test print, we're going to use a test palette and do our first print. So we're going to be using black ink, so we're going to use a white test palette. Get our spray adhesive over here. Spray a very small amount of spray adhesive down. Center the palette up. Put the shirt in the print position. Come grab our squeegee and then apply ink. See the consistency of black? In a little bit will show white. It's going to be much thicker. So when you apply ink to your screen, you don't want to apply ink in the image area. You want to apply the ink on the bottom of the screen. Depending on how many shirts you're doing, you might want to apply a lot of ink or not a lot. You know, I recommend not using a ton of ink on the screen because the more ink on your screen, the dirtier things get and the messier things get. You want to keep your ink in the center of your screen. If you get a little ink on the edges over here, you can just take some Crazy Clean wipes or some of your shop towel wipes. Just kind of clean it up. Remember, you don't want ink on your screen or near the edges of your screen, because as you're pulling the screen up and down, if that ink gets on your finger, then it transfers to the shirt and it makes a pain. You have to actually clean it out after the process, which is never fun. Make sure that's all nice and clean, all the ink gets cleaned up, so when we're handling the screen, we don't get any ink on our fingertips. Now with black ink going through a screen, you typically don't have to do what is called flooding a screen. Flooding a screen actually loads the screen or loads the inkwell up with ink. This is a 230 mesh screen. Once again, it's a little higher mesh because we got some detail here. We don't have any halftones, but we do have some detail. And we don't have to have a very open mesh because we're going on a light garment. We don't need a lot of ink to go on a light garment. So that would be a flood of a screen. Typically, you don't even need to do this with this type of print. This would be more prevalent if you're using this type of print, which we'll show in a second. But I just wanted to show you what a flood is. A flood, you don't want to press really, really hard. You kind of want to move the ink on top of the screen, not actually printing through the screen. So this is you barely press on the squeegee at all. And you don't want to see your image area through your flood. You want to keep your ink on top of your image area. Once flooded, we'll now come down and print. Now this is the first print we're doing in the video, so it's important that we cover how the print angle on the squeegee is printed with. There's two ways to print. You can either push the squeegee or you can pull the squeegee. We're actually going to show you both in this segment right here, but once you actually start printing, for one particular print, you only want to do one or the other. You can't pull some prints and then go back and push some prints, because as you pull the squeegee, it actually moves the mesh underneath the squeegee. So you're going to be pushing the mesh this way or pulling the mesh this way. Now it's very, very minimal, and the newer or better the screen you have, the less you actually have the movement of the mesh, but still it can cause for registration problems if you're doing one shirt pushing, one shirt pulling, so on and so forth. So first, let's show pulling the squeegee. Now black ink's probably the easiest ink to print with because it's so thin. The thinner the ink, the easier it is to print with. To do the print, you want to get over your press like so, and you want to make sure that when you're printing, you clear the ink behind the back of the squeegee. Kind of like that. You don't want to leave any ink left behind. You can actually pull your finger across the screen and not pull any ink back up with it. To show you the wrong way to print, a lot of people just want to get as much ink on the shirt as possible, so they're going to come down here, bear down on the squeegee, and just kind of smash it in. Look how much ink I actually left behind. That's not good because we're not clearing the ink out of the screen, we're actually smashing it into the screen. The goal of the print, because your image area right now, there's ink loaded up in it. The image area is actually holding the ink like a well. So what you want to do is just shear the ink through the well and onto your shirt. You don't want to smash it onto your shirt. Go ahead and do our first print. Put some pressure on there. Do the print like that, or like so. And then pull it up and take a look at it. We have a good print. We do have one of our registration marks open, which is okay because this is a test print, and that's why we used a test pellet. So make sure this is all lined up, centered up on the press and on the palette, which it appears to be so. Make sure all the image area is clean. Make sure there's no pinholes, which doesn't look like there's any pinholes. The only thing that we need to do is tape this up. So for this, I'm going to just use Scotch tape because it's such a small mark, and Scotch tape's easy to pull right back off the screen when we're ready to go clean it. Alright, let's load a shirt, start making some money. Flip it open, push all the way onto the palette. And pull it back to the neckline, centering it out. Smooth it out really quickly. Make sure there's ink on the back of your squeegee. Let the press settle. And with this, we're just going to do 2 prints to ensure coverage. There we have it. It's our final print. Now, the print is completed, but the ink's still wet. We have some funny responses and comments on our website throughout the years saying like, okay, well my shirt's been sitting on my kitchen table for 3 days and it has not dried. Well, the problem with plastisol is it will not dry until it's heat cured. Plastisol ink needs to be cured to a temperature of 320 to 325 degrees in order to make sure it doesn't wash out of the shirt. Now to do this, once it reaches that point, depending on how thick the ink is, sometimes that 320 degrees has to travel from the top of the ink down to the base of the ink. So for this particular print, the ink's very thin because it's a black ink covering a white shirt. We don't need a lot of ink. So pretty much once it reaches 320 degrees, measuring it with a temp gun, we're pretty much ensured that it's going to cure within a couple seconds. That point of reaching 320 degrees will typically take 25, 30, 35 seconds depending on your heat source. Now that's kind of referring to a flash dryer and going through a conveyor dryer tunnel. Obviously you have a bigger flash dryer, big conveyor dryer, that process can happen a lot faster. Once it reaches that 320 degrees and cures to the base of the ink, we're good to go, and you can pretty much ensure that the ink's not going to wash out of your garment, which is what you want. So let's cover the curing options that you have. Now depending on the type of kit you got, you could have a different curing option in your kit. Your very most basic curing option would be your heat gun. Now a heat gun puts off a lot of heat, but it puts off a very concentrated heat source. So when we turn the heat gun on, we need to let it warm up for about, I would say, 5-10 seconds to when it cures up and you can actually see the heat and the red hot hair coming out of it. Now you also want to use probably the high setting of the heat gun so you get the most amount of ink as possible. Now, if you can feel it here, this puts out about maybe a round radius circle, 2 inches, 3 inches of heat, depending on how close you go. And you probably want to get around 2 to 3 inches to the heat gun from the shirt, and in order to make sure that you're not getting too hot and you're not getting too cool. The first thing you want to do when you use a heat gun or a flash dryer to cure the shirt is actually to take the shirt off the platen and set it back over the platen or set it on a separate drying table. This allows the heat to penetrate through the garment. If you leave it stuck down to the platen acts as a barrier and it takes a lot longer to actually cure the shirt. So take it off the platen and then set it on top of the platen like so, or on a separate drying table so you're not tying up space on your press. Then with the heat gun, you're going to want to go around in circles like this, each section of the shirt for about 25 to 30 seconds. The reason why we have to do it in sections is if we do it across like this, the ink's getting hot and then it's getting cold, and then it's getting hot and then it's getting cold. The ink, in order to reach that 320 cure point, needs to be hot until, so it starts like, let's say 200 degrees and then it goes all the way up to 320 degrees, then it's cured. So you have to have a consistent source of heat. Now we're moving it over to the next section. We can use a laser temp gun to kind of measure this. Right now we're at, there we go, 320. Next section. $320. So you kind of got to go all the way around the shirt like this, very carefully. Whether you're using a temp gun or not, you do need to ensure that the ink reaches 320 degrees. Plastisol kind of emits a little bit of a burnt smell when it cures. You kind of smell it, especially on the thicker inks. On this ink, you can't really smell it that much. But kind of going across the design like this, about 20 seconds in area. 20-25 seconds in area. Obviously, if it's a thicker, like a white ink, you're going to be doing that a little bit longer, like 30 seconds in area. The heat gun is good for, playing around, getting used to the process, and just learning and having fun with screen printing. It's not good for production, as you see. I mean, I'm sitting here for already over a minute, and the shirt's not even halfway cured yet. The other thing is consistency and quality. Let's say I hit this area of the shirt and then I skip to this area of the shirt. Well, the middle of those two areas could wash out if they didn't reach 320 degrees. So for a consistent and quality cure, you want a complete encompassing heat source. Now there's a couple different ways to do that. The most easiest way and the most user-friendly way is obviously going to be a flash dryer or a conveyor dryer. Now some people have put shirts in their oven before. Most people say that ovens are for pizzas, and they're kind of dangerous because putting a shirt in and out, sometimes you can burn yourself. So if you do that, you want to be very careful But you put your oven on like 400 degrees, put it in there for about 30 seconds. You can use a temp gun like this, very handy to have in your oven to ensure that it's reaching that 320 degrees. The other thing that you can use, as we'll show as we're using the flash dryer, is curing temp strips, which actually thermally count how much heat the surface of the shirt is reaching. So now we're getting close to being done here, but still we have the bottom of the shirt to do, and we're still not done yet. For a faster, more consistent cure, we're going to pull in our flash dryer. Now, a flash dryer has the length and width of the flash dryer, which this is a 16/16. There's 18/18s, 18/24s, depending on how big it is. And underneath that is a complete heating element. So we can get under here and shoot that really quick. You can see this flash dryer is emitting an even source of heat throughout that whole 16x16 area. Now, the flash dryer does cool down near the edges, so a 16/16 flash dryer, if you're doing it on a 16/16 print, you might have to move it back and forth. 16/16 flash dryer is kind of like a squeegee. It's best for maybe an inch smaller on either side, so a 14/14 print. Let's pull in our flash dryer here. This is the Ryonet EconoCure flash dryer. Very affordable, very user-friendly, very high-quality flash dryer. Now, first of all, you need to measure your distance. Obviously, the lower you go, the faster your cures. Optimally, you're going to want maybe a 2 to 3 inch area. So right now, we got a little bit 4-inch area. We'll just lower it by loosening it. And then, now we're about 3 inches, perfecto. This flash dryer rotates on and off over the press. It doesn't have an on and off switch, but you can pretty much just plug it in. Now, the flash dryer does take about 15 minutes to warm up, so you don't want to plug your flash dryer in and then, boom, try to cure a shirt right away, because that's not going to work. The other thing to keep in mind about a flash dryer is that it radiates heat down from the top of the surface. So you have to have a very stagnant air and air area in order for that flash dryer to reach that whole surface of the shirt and cure it evenly. If it gets hot in your shop, or if it's in the summertime, you open a window, open a garage door, have a fan going, that fan will blow the hot air right out underneath your flash dryer, and even though the flash dryer is very hot, the surface of the shirt won't actually get to that 320 degree mark needed for curing. For this, we're going to show the use of cure temp strips. This is a little temp strip that you can place right next to your ink area. It has a couple different levels. It's a little sticky, so it's nice and accommodating on a shirt. Right here we have 290 degrees, 300 degrees, 310 degrees, 320 degrees, 330 degrees. As it reaches that temperature, it's actually going to turn a different color. So we optimally want it around the 320, 330 degree mark. So these will all turn, and then this will turn as well. Let's rotate this over and begin the curing process. Now, as it's curing, I'm also going to be using our temp gun, kind of timing the curing process as well. If you don't have a temp gun and you don't have cure strips, then you might have to just time it. And this flash dryer 16/16 is going to cure it in about 30 to 35 seconds, and that also depends on how thick the ink is. So right now, our ink's about 300 degrees, so we're climbing fairly quickly, 290, 300. If we move the dryer away prematurely, we can see our cure strip is reaching the 320 degree mark, but not quite there yet. So let's pull it back over and I'll use our temp gun again to kind of measure the heat. Right now we've been curing for about 20-25 seconds. And we're about 3 inches up. So we could actually go lower and cure faster. There we go. Our temp gun is reading 330 degrees, so we should be ready to go. Let's move the flash dryer off. We can see the temp strips reached our 320, 330 is actually already starting to turn as well. So we are cured, ready to go. The heat gun said the same thing, or the temp gun said the same thing. Now, if you smell it, you kind of get that burnt plastisol smell. It's fairly faint, but depending on how thick your ink is, and sometimes it's color ink, sometimes you can smell it more prevalently or not. Now, you don't want to use this on every single shirt. They're pretty cheap, but obviously once you have all your parameters set, you pretty much put a little timer on this flash dryer, or just time in your head, count 30 seconds, and we're good to go. That actual cure took a little bit longer than 30 seconds. We're about 35 seconds. If we would have lowered the flash dryer, we could have gone a little bit faster, but our temp strip says we're cured, and now we are ready to start production on this piece. Now that we're ensuring our cure, our test print is completed and our first print is printed, let's start printing this print in production. Now with this production print, to print this simple one color in production, the faster you can get a shirt on and off the press and cured, the better. So this is kind of based around like one of the starter kits that we sell, like the Semi-Pro, Semi-Pro Plus, something like that. We're going to have a one-station press, a flash dryer, a screen, and pretty typical job that somebody's going to start out doing. Now, if we're going to actually be curing on the platen, we're going to be sitting here crossing our fingers for 30 seconds while that shirt cures. So what I kind of recommend doing is, for the final cure, taking the shirt off the platen and setting it on a separate table or a side platen in order to do the cure on this side rather than tying up your press. Because while it's curing, you can actually be putting another shirt on and then you're increasing your production speed. Now to really increase your production speed, you'll see later with a multiple color press or a conveyor dryer, but this is kind of starting out very basics. So we'll get our flash dryer in position over here. Then we'll have our t-shirts up over here. And then we'll spray our spray adhesive on our palette. Typically you have to spray your palette up about once every 10 or 15 shirts. Let's get going here. Now for this production print, we're actually going to be pushing the squeegee. So you can kind of see the difference between me pulling the squeegee and pushing the squeegee and how that correlates to how fast I can actually print. Pull it up to the line here. Then we'll load the screen with ink, push it down and do our print. We're going to hit this twice. Now, I love pushing the squeegee because when you push, you actually use your body weight to push against the ink, so it's a lot less strenuous on your hands and your arms. It doesn't work very well with thick inks like we'll show later, but it works great for thinner inks like this print. So that print's good to go. We're actually going to pull it off. Pull it over to the side here, set it on the platen, rotate the flash over it, start our count, which is 30 seconds. So you can even have a timer right here, just counting your head. The way I'm doing this, by the time I get this shirt done and off the press, it's going to be about 30 seconds exactly. Straighten the shirt out, lift it up, push it down, load the ink up with screen up with ink. 2 prints. This shirt's now cured. Can pull this off, push it to the side, push this one on, rotate the flash dryer over, and repeat the process until our job's done. So you can see I'm going a little bit faster than actually curing the shirt on the platen right here. When you're printing this job, let's say in a production format, the thing you want to make sure is that this flash sits over the shirt the same amount of time every single time. And then also you don't have air flowing around the flash to blow the hot air underneath it. So having a little timer is great to have if you're doing this type of job in production. Now you don't have to put the shirt on a side pallet or a different press or a side table. You can cure it here, but you're just going to go a little bit slower. But always remember to pull the shirt off and set it on top of the platen to get that platen away and not act as a heat barrier and curing the shirt and making sure the ink is able, or the heat is able to travel through the shirt rather than getting stuck on the platen.